Hi, y'all. I'd like to welcome everybody to the GIG, a Southwest Michigan go-to meeting and in-person meeting. It's November 10th at noon, shortly after noon, and I'd like to first thank the Natural Health Center of Kalamazoo for providing a classroom for people who wanted to see it live in their classroom, projected onto the wall. I'd like to thank everybody for making it an in-person, yay, and taking the time. And we have a couple people joining us online too. And Sister Jenny is here, and welcome, Sister Jenny. And I am delighted, and it's a great honor to have Kim Collier as a guest speaker for us. For y'all who don't know her, she's the author of the Gluten Free and Allergy Free Passbook. And the reason she made this was her own journey. And through her own journey with food allergies and celiac disease, she has a plethora of information and tools for us. And she's kind enough to take some of her time out of her busy schedule to share some of her knowledge about how to stay gluten free while we are traveling. So, with no further ado, let us all welcome Kim. Thank you, Kim. Woo!
Well, thank you for such a great introduction. I really appreciate it, and for the warm welcome. So I wish I could be there in person. So sorry about that. I just wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to talk to all of you both. Obviously, everyone that's in the classroom as well as anybody that's online. So what Vicki and I had wanted to do was that I have a presentation put together. So what I had thought was that I would walk through the presentation, and then at the end, answer any questions that anyone might have about eating out, traveling, pretty much anything that might be on your mind. So this first slide, Vicki touched upon a couple of these things. From a personal journey perspective, I had actually been, which I'm not sure, how many have been most recently diagnosed, but it took a team of doctors a long time to figure out that I had celiac disease, and then I also had a number of food allergies, so that I'm allergic to dairy and fish and shellfish and different preservatives and blah blah blah. So that was about 12 years ago, and at the time I was actually a partner with Accenture, and I was an international business consultant. So instead of me being at home when I was diagnosed and trying to figure out how to cook inside the home, all of a sudden I'm like, what do I do outside the home? And at that time, there were a couple chapters and a couple pages about dining out and traveling, but not a lot. And so as I was working with clients around the world, I was doing a lot of research, obviously, just to try and figure out how to live. And once I had pulled all this together after about 3 years, it was like, you know what? This information could really help a lot of people, not only in the U.S., but also around the world, for those of us with celiac disease and following gluten-free diets as well as food allergies. So that led me to establish Gluten-Free Passport, and I started that in 2005. And our whole mission was really twofold. From a consumer perspective, it was to help all of you eat out and travel, which is obviously why we're here today. And then it was also to educate businesses about food and travel. So, how can they prepare foods that are safe for us to eat, and what do they need to consider from products perspective? So, and then Vicki had already mentioned as far as about that I had created my first book actually came out in 2005, and that was Let's Eat Out. And then I had my fourth edition just came out in January of 2014. So, and then since then we've created a lot of different ebooks and mobile apps and travel packs and all that kind of good stuff. So, and we've won a lot of awards and we've been honored about it. So, anyway, so that's just kind of like a quick little background so that you know who's speaking since I'm not there. So. From an agenda perspective, what I wanted to do was that I wanted to just spend a few minutes as far as about what's going on from across the globe about special diets, both gluten-free as well as food allergies. And then what are some of the key steps that we all need to remember when we're eating out and traveling from a food perspective. And then where we start like really diving into things is really like where can gluten and wheat be hidden in meal preparation. There's a lot of times that I'm presenting to audiences that are both gluten-free as well as have a lot of food allergies, and so then I touch upon a lot of other things besides gluten. But in this one, based upon, GIG of Southwest Michigan, then I really have a lot of stuff just focused on gluten-free. And then I wanted to talk about gluten-free travel in the U.S. and international travel considerations. So does that sound good to everybody?
Looks marvelous.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, then we'll just jump right in. From a numbers perspective, I remember when I was first diagnosed and they gave me a piece of paper and they said, okay, you have celiac to live your life. And you're like, what? What am I supposed to do? And how do you spell gluten? What is it? And so, when we were doing the research, it's amazing because not only obviously from a celiac perspective for 1 to 2% of the population, but everyone else is really that's following a special diet. And not that I want people to be forced or required to have special diets, but for those people that are following special diets, what it does for those of us that have to is that it really helps because now we're not talking about 1 or 2 million people. Unfortunately, the numbers are high. I mean, we have over 100 million people in North America, or that's like 1 in every 3 people that are following some type of special diet. And then we have almost another 200 million in Asia and Europe. So worldwide, it's 300 million people that are following special diets. So what that does is that from a business standpoint, even though a lot of organizations and businesses, that they're like, yes, we want to help people and they're being altruistic, it is still business. And so, we've seen so many more businesses get involved in gluten-free products and restaurants coming out with gluten-free menus and then schools taking a look at it. And it's because of the numbers. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to tee that up. And then the next slide, as far as from a trends perspective, again, unfortunately, it's dramatically growing, and a lot of that is from health. For those of you that have just been recently diagnosed, we have better testing, we have better education. 14, 15 years ago, doctors here in the U.S. thought it was 1 in 4,300 people for celiac disease, whereas we know from the research from Dr. Fasano and his team, it's 1 in 133, and that was back in 2004. So, they're educating healthcare professionals, they're educating doctors now in med school about it. There's a lot more education going on if it's with nurses and naturopaths and all that good stuff. From a consumer perspective, we are also driving it because of the increased prevalence. Now we have increased expectations. So, from a quality of life and like what do we expect, that we want better tasting products versus for those of you that were diagnosed a while ago and that you remember like the bread and I still remember, I was a guest speaker in London and Australia, New Zealand and stuff. And so I always loved to bring products back for my mom's because she was the baker. And so when she would bake different things, and she would bake, her chocolate chip cookies, which were one of her favorites. And so my nieces and nephews would try it and they're like, oh, these are Aunt Kim's cookies. These are terrible. And then when it started getting a lot better, they're like, oh, I'm going to eat these cookies. And I was like, wait, those are Aunt Kim's cookies. They're like, oh, Grandma, there can't be. They taste so good. So it's just a matter of like the quality from the products. And then because of the health and the consumers and the government's obviously driving that, we obviously have better labeling. We're seeing more in the regulations for schools. One of the things, and this doesn't have to do with celiac disease or gluten-free, but for those people that are anaphylactic, I'm just thrilled because now schools are starting to carry EpiPens in the case of an emergency if a child doesn't have their EpiPen or if they need an extra one, that they have those as far as for stockpiles, whereas before they couldn't do that. And then ultimately business, which is what we're going to be talking about with restaurants and the travel, and then just even in the media and how many products are gluten-free. This one, I saw this in Nielsen that 23.3 billion U.S. products are labeled gluten-free. Well, as far as for that, a lot of those are naturally gluten-free. But then there's about, that depends on what research that you believe, but there's about $7 billion of products that were typically not gluten-free that are gluten-free now. So again, it's just showing the market. So if we go on to the next one. So what we had done, and this was a few years ago, as I said, when we were guest speakers around the world, I talked to a lot of different manufacturers, and we were having the same questions, and it was, that they wanted to go back to their upper management and say, gluten-free is really important. We really need to expand our product line, but they didn't have any hard and fast numbers. And so because of my background at Accenture, and I did a lot of market research stuff, so that what we did was that we sponsored gluten-free or being free from your allergies on your quality of life? Like, what are your top concerns? And as you can see on the slide, the top concern is social gatherings, 77%. And from the segment that we had over 2,500 consumers from 35 countries answer this. So it was fascinating when we were doing the breakdown between like the U.S. and then we did U.S., Canada, North America, we did Europe, we did Australia, New Zealand, and obviously across the board, social gatherings was the top one. And then obviously eating out. And if it's eating out close to your neighborhood around the corner from your house, or if it's eating out in the U.S., or if it's eating out, overseas in an English-speaking country or in a foreign-speaking country, it's obviously a huge concern. And then, daily foods and travel and health. So that just kind of gives you an idea that for those of you that are concerned about social gatherings and eating out, that's what most of us are concerned about, as well as for traveling. So if we go into the next one, so the three key steps, and if you look at this on the slide, the three key steps that we always say is education, communication, preparation. You're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so why, what's so important about that? Well, from an education perspective, it's really, when you first get diagnosed, obviously, that you're educating yourself on what you can and can't eat. But a lot of times when we're first diagnosed, and this is where I was different because I was traveling so much, that I wasn't looking at it from, okay, I'm going to be at home, I'm going to be cooking my meals, and so what are some of the things that I need to consider? It was really, how do I consider those types of questions instead of me preparing the meal, but I was going to have somebody else preparing the meal in restaurants. So not only educating yourself on what you can and can't eat, but it's also, and this is where we're going to be getting into some of the hidden gluten, is, where could gluten and wheat be hiding? And, making sure that you're communicating that in terms that the person, when you're traveling and you're in restaurants, that they understand. Because a lot of times, like, well, here's one of my favorite stories. I was in Sydney and I'd given a presentation, and this one woman came up and she, after the presentation, she said, I have to tell you this story. She said, my husband and I were in a restaurant. He has celiac disease. I can eat anything, but he doesn't like to ask a lot of questions. And so he just said, I need a gluten-free meal to the waiter. And she said the waiter looked at him, looked at me, and looked at him again and said, sir, I'm so sorry. I can't give you a free meal. He's like, no. And all the waiter heard was free. And, for whatever reason, he didn't hear gluten. And so that's kind of like, it kind of leads you into the communication component. So instead of saying, I need a gluten-free meal, or I can't have wheat, it's more a matter of, if somebody says you can't have wheat, there's been times that people say, oh, do you want a macaroni salad? I'm like, what? No. So from a communication standpoint, even though I have celiac disease, typically what I say, and obviously it's dependent upon everyone's comfort level, when I go into a restaurant, regardless of where I am, as I said, in the States, traveling overseas, is that I say I'm allergic to gluten, so I can't have any bread, I can't have any pasta, I can't have any wheat, and I can't have any flour. And they're like, oh. And then I just add in my dairy. I'm also allergic to dairy, so I can't have any butter, milk, or cream. And so it kind of gives them an idea of, sometimes they come back and they're like, are you allergic to eggs? I'm like, no. I'm not allergic to eggs. I'm just allergic to gluten and dairy, even though I am allergic to fish and shellfish, but I don't talk about that at the very beginning because it's a matter of like what I'm going to be asking, asking about from the menu, which we'll get into. So from a communication, what I recommend is think about it, put yourself in the restaurant staff, and a lot of times they say, like if you say, oh, is this chicken gluten-free? They're going to look at you and go, yeah, it's chicken. Are these french fries gluten-free? Well, yeah, that's potatoes. Instead of, is this chicken flour dusted? Oh, I don't know. I have to go check with the kitchen. Is this chicken marinated in soy sauce? Oh, I'm not sure. So, and that's the kind of stuff that, as I said, we're going to spend a little bit more time with. But those are just kind of examples as far as for the communication. So educating yourself on what you can and can't eat, and how do you communicate that? And then actually communicating that when you're in the restaurant, or if you're at the hotel, or if you're wherever you are, even if you're in a store, like I love to go and check out stores when I'm traveling, which my might sound strange, but I found great products when I was in Italy and in France, and Russia not so much in Egypt either. But for some of the other places, this is like, oh, these are amazing products. So being able to communicate what your needs are, and then really getting into it from a preparation standpoint. And again, what I like to say is, for those of you that feel more comfortable in cooking your meals, think about it from how do you prepare your meals and what are some of the things that you think about. And then we're going to be asking those same types of questions to restaurant and hotel staff. So on the next slide, what we have is we actually have a couple different approaches to dining out with special diets. I usually get asked a question about quick service and fast food, so that's the reason why I just wanted to touch upon that, and then we can move on to regular restaurants. But, as far as, so everything that I was just talking about for the communication and saying, well, I'm allergic to gluten, so I can't have any bread, I can't have any flour. As you know, if you went up to a fast food counter, quick service, and you were talking to people there, most of them would have glazed over looks going, what? Plus, you never really ask them the questions. So everything that I talk about after this slide is relevant for restaurants and for hotels. But as far as for ordering fast food and quick service, even though I don't eat fast food a lot, but there's times that, I'm traveling and then I need something to eat. And I get my protein bar in my purse, but I'm like, I need something else. So the only way that you can really know if fast food or quick service has their menu items have gluten is that you either look at their website, because they have allergen charts now. Some of those, because of the labeling laws, in the U.S., it will require the top 8. That includes wheat, but it doesn't include gluten. So some of the fast food quick service places identify gluten, and some only include wheat, plus the other top 8 allergens. So you can go to their website. Like on our website, we have a fast food tab, and then you can go to our website and you can click on to their direct allergen chart. There's also some other websites that are out there that you can access that have the information, that they have links to the fast food and quick service places. We created a fast food app, I Can Eat Fast Food. That's an Apple app. And so you put in that you can't have gluten or you can't have gluten and dairy. And then it has a database of like 35 chains with, I don't know, I think we're up to like maybe 4,000 menu items or something. And it shows you, and you can hide what you can't eat, because I don't want to see what I can't eat. I just want to see what I can eat. And so that's why we labeled it that. There's also, for those of you that have smartphones, there's also a number of different restaurant directories that are out there, and they have it for apps as well as on their website. So, like Find Me Gluten Free is a big one. Allergy Eats, Allerdyne. We don't have a directory. We just have a number of restaurants and bakeries and pizzerias listed on ours. But Find Me Gluten Free, Allergy Eats, Allerdyne, they have thousands of restaurants. They're primarily in the U.S. Just because of everything that we've done is global, that we have a number of different locations that I've personally visited and that people have contacted me about, so we included those. And then what we're going to dive into is really about eating in ethnic restaurants and asking the questions based on the ingredients and the food preparation to make sure that your meal's safe. So if you're in an Italian restaurant around the corner from your house, or if you're in an Italian restaurant in Italy, or an Italian restaurant in Russia, what do you do? So, and then that's what we have on the next slide. So again, if you think about it, in my example as far as for, the husband, is this gluten free? And the waiter's like, I can't give you a free meal. Think about it in terms of these questions. If you ask, is this hamburger gluten free? Or if you ask the question, do you put breadcrumbs in your hamburgers, or are they made with 100% meat? And a lot of times people don't even think about it, because at home, if you don't put breadcrumbs in your burgers, you would just think it's straight meat. There's some places where I ask this question if I'm thinking about having a burger, and they look and they're a little bit, appalled. We would never put breadcrumbs in our hamburgers. I said, well, I didn't think that you would. However, I've been in restaurants, which is true. I've been in restaurants that they do have breadcrumbs in their burgers. So instead of just asking for a hamburger with no bun, that you need to ask the question. I always also ask, from a burger standpoint, do you put breadcrumbs in your burgers? And they say no. And then I say, okay, what kind of seasonings do you use? Do you use any packaged seasonings? And they're like, well, why? I said, well, a lot of packaged seasonings have gluten in them. I'm idea. So it's kind of like you're also just starting to educate the restaurant staff. If you're dealing with the waitress or waiter, if you're dealing with the manager, sometimes, depending upon the restaurant, sometimes you talk to the chef. People usually ask me, like, what do I prefer? And I know that and obviously it depends on everyone's comfort level. A lot of times when I go into a restaurant, I typically deal with the wait staff. So I typically deal with the waiter or the waitress. However, depending upon the restaurant, sometimes if I don't, what I was going to say, depending upon the restaurant, they have different protocols or procedures that are in place. So as soon as you say that you need gluten-free or that you have food allergies, the protocol is they immediately bring a manager over. And so, and that's just part of their policy. So it kind of depends on what restaurant or restaurant chain that you're going to. Sometimes if I'm talking to a waiter or waitress, and you can kind of get a feeling that they really have no idea, and you start getting a little nervous, like, I don't think I could be safe here, then I'll bring the manager over. And then I'm going to ask questions. But again, instead of asking, is this, looking at your menu and go, is this gluten-free? Is this gluten-free? A lot of times I know that people ask, okay, so what on your menu is gluten-free? But you can do that. What I like to do is think about what am I in the mood to eat, and then I ask the questions to make sure that it's safe. Even when people say, when the waiter, waitress, or manager says, XYZ is gluten-free, well, this chicken dish is gluten-free. Okay, so you don't use any wheat flour on that. It's not flour dusted. It's not marinated in soy sauce. It's not this, and they're like, no. So I still do the confirmation component of it. Another example is, if you were having seafood bisque, you wouldn't think about it from a imitation crab meat. However, there's gluten in surimi, and a lot of, obviously, as far as for a lot of bisques, that those are thickened with flour. I talked about, do you flour dust your chicken? But you also need to remember that a lot of times, that they're flour dusting their fish or their veal. And the reason that restaurants flour dust a lot more than what we do in the home is that they like to in order to, when they do flour dust it, what that does is it helps to even out when they put a sauce over it, because they want their dishes to be beautiful. But for us, that can't eat gluten, no, we can have a beautiful dish, but no flour dusting on ours. As far as for marinades and seasonings, as I mentioned, is it marinated in soy sauce? A lot of times people say, oh, I don't want anything marinated, I just want it plain. And for those of you that have been diagnosed for a while, you know how many times can you eat a plain baked potato with plain chicken and sea broccoli? I mean, after a while, it's not that much fun to eat that. No. Whereas when you get some of the meals, and there's been times when, I've gotten a meal and my friends are like, oh, I'll have what she's having. I'm like, oh, good. This looks really good. But my point is as far as for packaged seasonings, is if you say you don't want anything marinated, a lot of times with restaurants, it's very simple. It's marinated in olive oil, salt, and pepper. And so from a taste profile, obviously it would taste much better if it was just plain chicken or plain veal. And then there's times, depending upon if they say, oh, well, we make our own seasonings, or, oh, yeah, well, we have our own seasonings and we actually sell it. Well, that's the time I'm like, oh, you know what? Do you mind if you bring up the label so I can look at it? Most times it's herbs, but you never know. And even if they don't make it in-house, you can always ask them to take a look at the package label. The other thing, too, is that unfortunately, there's also misinformation out there that now people, like, some of the, I've been to restaurants and they're like, oh, no, there's gluten in that. I'm like, how can there be gluten? What kind of cocktail sauce are you using? This was from a friend of mine. I wasn't having cocktail sauce because obviously I don't eat shrimp or shellfish. But so I was with a friend and she's gluten-free as well. And so they said, no, you can't have the cocktail. I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. I said, can you just bring the bottle over? And there was, I can't remember, there was something, and it was like corn, was it corn flour? I don't know. It was something really strange in however they were making it, which doesn't make, when I said about the corn, but like, this doesn't make any sense. But it was just because they saw the word flour. So then they correlated it to wheat flour and they weren't thinking about, and actually my friend could eat it. So anyway, so that's just giving you an idea as far as for some questions to ask, to put it more in restaurant terms for your entrees and for your marinades. From a restaurant, and then I have on the next slide, I have some other examples. So the way that I usually approach it, regardless of if I'm in the States or if I'm overseas, is that I take a look at the menu, and depending upon the ethnic cuisine, I usually have a couple key dishes that are like my go-to dishes that, I'll look at what's on the menu. I'm like, ooh, this looks good. So I might have, I'll pick out 2 or 3 potentials, and then I'll go with my first one to see if that's going to be possible to make that gluten-free. And then I'll go to my second one if it's not. One thing that everybody needs to remember is there's times, which sounds kind of strange to us, but there's times that restaurants have their food completely prepped. So I was ordering chicken one time in a restaurant, and then they said that it was flour dust, and I said, well, could you just make me, just a plain chicken breast, and just pan fry it in olive oil? And they're like, no, we really can't. And I'm like, really? And they said, no. They said all of our chicken is prepped, or all of our beef is prepped. I'm like, huh. And so there's restaurants, depending upon the type of restaurant and what their specialties are, is that when they get a lot of the food in, that they prep it all in the morning before lunch, or they prep it in between lunch and dinner. And so at that point, I was like, huh, I don't have any chicken. There's no chicken. But sometimes it happens. As far as from, where gluten is hidden in some of the meal preparations, obviously from cross contact, making sure that there's fresh oil if they're going to pan fry our dishes. Even when I'm in Italian restaurants, even when they have gluten-free pasta on the menu, I still say, be sure to have the chef cook my gluten-free pasta in fresh water. And they're like, oh, yeah. And I've been to some restaurants that even though that they should have been trained, and for whatever reason, that they were very surprised about that. So it's interesting because when I'm in Italian restaurants, and they're like, oh, you know what, it's going to take a little bit longer because we're going to have that, we're going to cook that in fresh water. I'm like, perfect, because I was just going to ask you about that. As far as for sauces, I know that, it depends on people's comfort level, how recently you were diagnosed. I'm a real foodie, and so I like a lot of different flavors and herbs and all kinds of stuff. And so from a sauce standpoint, I like to have sauces. However, obviously I have to make sure that, that I'm going to be safe, and obviously that's what we're talking about here. So one of the questions, which a lot of people don't think about, is to say, is this sauce made from a roux? Because a roux always contains wheat flour. And so if you say that the sauce is made from a roux, and if they say, oh, yeah, it's made from a roux, then, well, not all, but 99%, now are still made with wheat flour rather than substitute flours that don't have gluten in them. A lot of the sauces are thickened with flour, but that doesn't mean that in order to have a sauce, that all sauces have to be thickened with flour. So, I remember I was in Paris one time, and it was, I don't know, it was about a year, or maybe a year after I was diagnosed. And so I was sitting there, and I said, well, I had my dining card, and I showed it to him, and I said, I can't, so I'm pointing, and I said, okay, I can't have any gluten, I can't have any wheat flour, blah, 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 and I can't have any dairy, and they're just, of course, in French, they're like, oh, le pauvre, which means, oh, you poor thing. And I said, well, as long, I said, I don't, so I pointed to, it can be plain, and so the manager came over who spoke very good English, and he's just like, you know what, he said, we cannot, you are in Paris, and we cannot give you a filet with no sauce. And I said, well, I just can't have any gluten. And so then they made this balsamic reduction that was like to die for with no butter. And as I said, when my friends' fillets came, and they looked at mine, and they looked at theirs, mine looked much better. So my point is that you can still have very good, excellent tasting sauces without having flour in them. And for those of you, that have been experimenting at home, you know that. And so it's a matter of, sometimes, and I also say, when I'm in a restaurant, that, okay, if, once they say that there's flour in the sauce, and I said, okay, well, here's the thing. I said, I can see that it's pretty crowded in the restaurant. I said, so if the chef doesn't have time to make a sauce, like a balsamic reduction or another sauce that doesn't have flour in it and doesn't have butter in it, it's okay, I'll have it plain. And sometimes they'll come back and they're like, you know what, we were so swamped in the kitchen, he just couldn't make enough sauce. And I said, no, that's fine. And other times they're like, oh, he just couldn't have your dish go out with the sauce. And so then sometimes they put it on the side for you to taste it. So just to kind of think about that as well. As far as for soups, a few years ago, it was very rare if I ever had a soup in a restaurant anywhere in the world. I remember I was a guest speaker in New Zealand, and then I was on a couple of radio interviews and stuff. And so there's, for those of you that have been to New Zealand, Christchurch is this absolutely gorgeous cathedral. So I'd gone to the cathedral, like, okay, I'm starving. Okay, where am I going to go and eat? And I turned the corner, and there was this tiny little cafe that was attached to the to the cathedral, and it had this sign, and this was like maybe 6 years ago. And so it had this sign, gluten-free soup. I almost fell right on the floor. And so I'm like, wow, that's gluten-free soup. Wonder if it's dairy-free. So I walk in, and I say, okay, so I asked if their soup had any dairy in it, and it didn't. And I said, oh, I can't believe this is my first soup I've ever had in a restaurant. I'm so excited. I said, but don't give me any bread because I'm gluten-free. They're like, of course we have gluten-free bread, right? Gluten-free soup. I'm like, really? And I'm sure that they thought I had four heads, like, where did this person come from? Why is she so excited about getting gluten-free soup? But the point is that now there are more and more soups, depending on the restaurants, that are made in-house, and that they make it from their own chicken broth, and that they don't use packaged bouillon. And so, obviously, the question that you need to make sure is that if they're using any kind of packaged bouillon or packaged seasonings in their soup, then, the probability of that having gluten is pretty high. And aside from a dedicated fryer, again, I use this example, but if you say, are your French fries gluten-free, they're going to say probably yes. However, if you say, are your French fries in the same fryer as your chicken fingers or your cheese sticks or your breaded calamari, and then they'll be like, oh, yeah, it is. The other thing, too, to remember is that even for the restaurants, like, I'm sure that everybody has their favorite restaurants that they go to and that they feel very safe. However, what you also need to do is that even though you go to those restaurants X amount of times, and the last time you could eat the fries there's been times when I've been to the same restaurant, and I still ask the question about the French fries because sometimes they're cleaning their dedicated fryer, sometimes their dedicated fryer is down, and they're down to one, and so those are the times that we kind of. You might think about getting a little more relaxed about asking the questions, and I just wanted to point out, that you need to make sure that you're going to be still asking the questions to make sure that it's going to be safe. So on the next slide, we have, and I talked about some of these as far as from a cross-contact perspective with the dedicated fryers and the cooking oil and the fresh water. From a kitchen preparation station perspective, the restaurants and there's a couple excellent things that have been taking place on the restaurant industry side. One is that before, all restaurants have to go through ServSafe. It's ServSafe certification, but that's ServSafe from a safety, like with salmonella and E. coli and all that good stuff. Now, restaurants, there's also the National Restaurant Association also has gluten-free and food allergy training that they have online. They also have partnered up with Nutrinfo, which provide on-site training. I'm actually a master trainer for them. And they also are doing it with schools and universities as well as K through 12, which is outstanding. So really, educating the restaurants and, the schools about the stations, and having separate utensils, just like we do in the home, right? That we have our separate utensils, we have our toasters, we have our cutting board, making sure about staff changing gloves, and if that's in the restaurant or if that's even in fast food, and then, obviously as far as from the properly cleaned surfaces. So now what we're going to do is then we're going to hop into more on the travel side and getting into airlines and hotels and all that stuff. Now I know for those of you that just travel within the U.S., depending upon the length of your flight, obviously there's not a lot of meals for the short haul flights, but for longer haul flights, they still serve meals. And the thing that I always do is that, if you're gluten-free, well, first of all, I should back up. From an airline perspective, what the airline industry has is that they have about 25 or so individual codes for special meals. So when I call up and I make a reservation, and I know that I can get a meal on board, what I do is I don't have them go and look up gluten-free meal. I just say, I just want a GFML. And they're like, oh, okay. And then they type it in. Now, the airline industry for their computer system can only handle one code. So even though I'm allergic to gluten, I'm allergic to dairy, and I'm allergic to fish and shellfish, I can't put those all in. So what I do is that I put GFML when I travel because I can see, obviously, if there's shrimp or if there's salmon, if there's any kind of seafood on my plate. If there's different sauces and if it looks like it could have dairy, then obviously I don't do that. But there's really nothing else that I can do from an airline meal perspective. For anaphylaxis, I usually when I'm talking to food allergy groups, I don't do a lot of detail with that, but we have that included in our book, and we have about a 20-step process, to make sure that you or your child are going to be safe if you have anaphylaxis to various foods. From a snack and light meal perspective, and I always like to do a show. If you have a show of hands, but since I'm not there, we can't do it. But I never carried food with me before I was diagnosed. But now I always have something in my purse. And so, it's a matter of, because I've gotten caught, and I'm sure that you have too, and so it's a matter of, okay, what do I carry? Well, it depends on how long my flight's going to be. I always make sure that I have protein bar, because a protein mix, or some type of protein, because I need to make sure that I have some protein. Then I have possibly something sweet if I'm in the mood for something sweet. Might have, a piece of fruit with me. I might have something that has, some carbs, if it's from a chip perspective, or depending upon how far my flight is. What I usually say is that if you have, like for an 8-hour flight, like if you're flying overseas, and if you're flying from Michigan to, let's say you're going to London. Now, that's typically an 8-hour, it depends if you can get a nonstop, or if you're going through Chicago. So if you're going through Chicago, you're probably like about 10 or 11. So for that, what I recommend is that you bring 3 meals. So make the assumption that you're not going to have a gluten-free meal on board. If you get a gluten-free meal, which is great, and I've had some incredible gluten-free meals actually on airlines, then you don't have to have the food that you brought on board. But in the event that that they bring you a gluten-free meal and it's labeled gluten-free, but they've taken off the cellophane and that they've stuck a muffin on top of it, you're like, okay, well I can't have that. So plan for the number of hours and add a meal, because you never know when you're going to get stuck someplace, you're going to be on the runway or whatever. The other thing too is, a lot of times people are like, well, then I have my wheelie, it's my refrigerator. Whatever you feel comfortable with, but I don't travel that way. What I do is if it's a longer haul flight, and I always do it when I'm going to Europe and when I go to Australia, New Zealand, from Chicago to New Zealand, I had a couple stops, and it was like, I was traveling for like 28 hours, and, I wasn't going to rely on anything that was in any of the airports that we would stop. So from a snack and light meal, what I do is that I have a soft-sided cooler that I bring with me on board. And from a TSA perspective, because obviously for liquids we have to comply with that, is that what I do is I put my ice in a double. I'm a big Ziploc girl, so I have a double Ziploc. I put ice in it. Before I go through security, I throw my ice out. I go through security, and then on the other side of security, I go to like a food stand that has ice. Might go to a bar, or if I'm running late, I get on board and I go to the flight attendant and just say, I have different food allergies, so I brought my own food. Do you mind filling up my baggie with ice? And they're like, no problem. And even halfway through the flight, if it's a long haul flight, I'll go, and if I see that it's already melted, I'll go and throw out the water, and I'll go get some more ice. So that's how I deal with the liquid. The other thing to remember is that a lot of times people, and I have never been stopped for food through TSA or through on the other end of whatever country that I've gone to. That being said, a number of people have talked to me about it. What you need to remember, which is a little bit different in your thinking, is like for applesauce. Applesauce, if you bring in like those little, 3-ounce, there's like the go-go, I love those things, it's like the go-go applesauce. And so if I bring that, that's considered liquid. So what I do is I have that in my quart container with my liquids. If I have peanut butter, there's some liquid in there, so I have my little peanut butter thing in there. Sometimes I bring my own salad dressing. And so as long as it's all within, the 4 ounces, but you have to make sure that anything that has any type of liquid in it is in your quart container. Otherwise, they will confiscate it. One of my funny stories, though, is that so I'm based in Chicago, and I think I was only going. It was only like a 2-hour flight. I think I was flying to New York, maybe. And so I put everything through, through the conveyor belt, and the one TSA guy, the security guy, he looks at me, he's like, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" I'm thinking, "Oh, no, what is he going to confiscate? What did I forget?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Was that a hard-boiled egg that I just saw in your carry-on?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, there's two." He said, "I've never seen a hard-boiled egg go down the conveyor belt before." I said, "Well, I have food allergies." I said, "So I just needed some protein early in the morning." So, for like that trip, I had two hard-boiled eggs, and I put it in a little Ziploc. And then I had my applesauce in my little quart container. And then I had a gluten-free muffin with me, and I was all ready and set to go. So just as an example, now the one thing which we'll talk about more for the international is that when you're in the U.S., when you bring food on board, like even when I bring like sandwiches, like I always toast my bread for my sandwich when I'm traveling because then the bread doesn't fall apart. So I usually have like Udi's or Canyon Bakehouse or whatever. So I'll toast it. I'll have that in an individual baggie. Then I'll have my Applegate turkey in another baggie. And then I also have the little baby packets of stirred, that you get at like the fast food places, little mustards and ketchups and mayo. And so obviously that's considered liquid. So I have a little mustard and mayo in my quart with my liquid for my contacts, in order to get it through TSA. But so that could be another snack for you. So, that's not only a snack, that's really a raw meal. So anyway, so if we wanted to hop on to the next slide, and then that way we'll still have time for questions. One thing I wanted to point out, and I touched upon it very briefly, is that as far as for food labeling, people usually think that that we usually lead the world in most things, right? However, in food labeling and in food allergies and celiac disease, we really don't. Australia and New Zealand had their labeling laws in 2002. EU had their allergy laws in 2005. We had ours in 2006, and we finally, which I was so thrilled with, and I'm sure all of you were too, last year in August, that we had our gluten-free labeling law passed by the FDA. That being said, the U.S., as I said, has the big 8 plus gluten now, so that we have milk, egg, fish, gluten, peanuts, shellfish, soy, tree nuts, and wheat. Those are ours. Australia, New Zealand, and the European Union have even more allergens that they identify. So they identify celery, they identify sesame, they identify mustard, they identify sulfites. So just to kind of be aware of that. So when you're traveling overseas and looking at the labels for the various products, you're going to see even more allergens under the contains than what you do here in the States. So on our next slide, I go into a little bit more from international travel perspective. Again, from a reservation perspective, what you need to do, what I recommend is that when you call, if it's through the travel agent or when you're booking your flight, make sure that you're saying you want a GSML meal. Then about 24 hours or 36 hours beforehand, I call and I make sure that I'm still getting the gluten-free meal. We talked about as far as for ethnic restaurants, the thing is about when you're going overseas, obviously it's going to be different if you're going to English-speaking countries versus foreign language-speaking countries. I never go anywhere that's a foreign-speaking country without a chef card. We created chef cards. When I was first diagnosed, I had used a number of chef cards, and then we changed it so that it would be more based on questions and like food prep and, is this flour dusted, dedicated fryer, that kind of thing. Because a lot of the really small cards were just a lot of words. It just depends on what you feel comfortable with. So, there's a number of people that provide the dining cards. We also have language guides. And so one of the things that I didn't feel comfortable with, and it was because, when I was diagnosed, and even now, is that when I'm traveling overseas to a foreign-speaking country, it's great to have the dining card. So I always have that on me, and I always bring multiple copies, and I always have paper. So even if I had it electronically, I always have paper because I don't want anyone taking my electronic device. And a lot of times restaurants like to keep the cards. That being said, and part of it was also my background because, I have a master's in international management, so language is always very important to me. But the other thing that we had done was that we created multilingual phrase passport so that it had multiple phrases. So we went to a professional translation company, and I had them translate about 300 phrases in various languages. And then we had native speakers take a look at it to make sure that that's the way that you'd be asking the question. I don't use it all that often when I'm traveling, but psychologically I know that I have it with me. So we have a lot more phrases for breakfast. We have health. We have additional allergens rather than just the top ones. So just to kind of give you an idea. And for the travel packs, the other thing that I always recommend, and there's a lot of sites that have links to them. I mean, we have it. You can Google it. A lot of sites, and I think GiG also has the links to it, is that there's celiac societies around the world. And they are just like GiG is super supportive for the people that are here. If you had somebody that contacted your chapter about coming to Southwest Michigan, you go out of your way in order to help them, find things that are gluten free. The same when you're going anywhere around the world. I've had incredible luck contacting the celiac associations, looking at their information. I love, even the Italian celiac site. There were a lot of times when I've been to Italy a number of times, and I used to live there too, but when I would go there, I would go to the Italian celiac site, and they have thousands and thousands of restaurants based upon region, based upon city, and they have it listed, if they have gluten-free pasta, if they have this, if they have that. There were a lot of times that, I wanted to make sure I had gluten-free pizza and gluten-free pasta when I was in Italy. I mean, that was a done deal. But there were times that I was like, oh, you know what, that place looks really cute. And my friends and I were like, yeah, let's go try that. And so then that's when I used the information about, ethnic food preparation rather than using the celiac site. So a lot of the celiac sites obviously are in their native language. So you could use Google Translate to go and do that. But, it really just goes to doing your research when you're going overseas. Excuse me. So, and then we can go on to the next one too. So this is just information about our, if you wanted any additional information about gluten-free passport or the gluten-free blog, and I've written a lot about different restaurants that I visited around the world, and so anyway, I wanted to leave. Well, we have a little bit, about 10 minutes for questions. So
I have a question. I'm just floored because I've been told I was going to be able to order my meal, and so I order it, and then it comes back that they're not doing any special meal request. Have you ever had that happen?
So just to make sure that I understand, you order a special meal,
airplane. Yeah. When what happens is when I make the reservation for the airplane, I get all excited when I say, I'd like to order a gluten-free meal for my son and I. And then they start putting it in, and then I'm sorry. It says that it's not available on this list.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought you were in a restaurant, not on a plane.
No, on a plane.
It's kind of odd, but it does happen. Not all airlines offer all of the meals that are included in the airline codes.
Yeah. Well, see, and the last couple of times, so you don't know a special trick I can do, can you?
No, unfortunately, the only thing is they come back because what they do is that when they make their reservation, then they go and they put the code in. However, that's an excellent point. I should have brought that up. Is that there are times that they don't offer those types of meals.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes, even somebody was like, oh, well, then I'll just order a fruit plate. And sometimes they're like, oh, we're not serving that. And it's like, really? You're not? But it's dependent upon the airline, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I thought. In that situation, obviously, you'd want to make sure that you brought enough meals in order to get you to your final destination and add another meal on top.
Yeah,
so
that's
what airline is good.
Well, you know what? The two airlines that we travel on is American and United.
And they don't do it.
I have yet to be. No, and I even was one time I used my freaking flyer points and got all three of us, my husband, my son, and I, first class. And I thought, oh, this way I don't have to pack all my food, because they told me they would be able to do it like 2 weeks
Wow, it's
before
really
the
odd
time.
because I'm a million miles on United, and I'm almost a million on American, and I've never had either one of them say that they didn't have gluten-free meals. I wonder if it was just that, but they were serving meals. It wasn't that it was a short.
Oh no, because this is out from Chicago or Detroit to either Sedona or to Reno, Nevada. But you know what I'm wondering? If I give them the code to put in.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, maybe they spelled gluten wrong. I mean, all of us have seen when people are like gluten. Okay, is it GLOOT? You're like, what?
No, I've been told that they don't have any special meal options on the flights, and they're always.
Well, yeah, then it must have just been as far as for that specific flight. The other thing too, which before it was only for really short flights, is that they say that they have the flight, but it's operated by another airline.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And so that there's a dual code, so that there's a UA code and an AA code, but then it's really like, I don't know, Frontier.
Yeah, I know.
Airline.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try using the code.
I bet that's what it was, is because, as I said, I've never had that happen on United American, but I bet that's what it was. Is that it was a what's it called? Not co-branded,
Yeah, co-owned, I know what you're talking about.
Cooperated is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
It's a co-operated flight, and so, but the meals, everything is really handled because it's not an American plane, and it's not a United plane. It's the other airline plane, and so then the meals are based upon that other airline.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
What about Lufthansa?
We had another question. Go ahead.
What about Lufthansa? Do they do that for you?
Oh yeah, Lufthansa includes meals.
That's what I thought. That's why I would fly.
Kim, I have a question on another area. My name is Nancy. I'm one of the enthusiastic supporters here this morning at NHC. And my question is about restaurants. You touched on the idea that there are instructions and training for restaurants online. I'm wondering if there are any regulations, or if you've heard any talk about the industry leaning toward regulating themselves toward expecting or saying restaurants must be trained, or in our dreams certified gluten-free kitchen. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. A few years ago, and I believe it was from New York, because Mayor Bloomberg was trying to do that, as far as for getting more of the foods and the meals identified, and giving consumers more information about that. And then the restaurants here in the U.S. obviously were all up in arms. Right now, obviously we don't have that. However, what's very interesting, and again, if you remember about when I was talking about the food labeling, about how we've been behind, but we have been leapfrogging in order to catch up. It's very interesting, because as far as in Europe, what they're starting to do is that they are starting to identify the different ingredients, and that ingredients, and they have specific regulations for the restaurants, and that was just starting to go into effect. It hasn't completely rolled out, because it just started, I believe it was like a month ago or so. But it's been in the legislation, and they've been trying to get it passed for a number of years. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, how that's going to play out from a regulatory perspective for the government. The other thing too is that I think it also depends based on the individually owned restaurants versus the chain restaurants. And even some of the chain restaurants that have gluten-free menus, but the training that they have and the level of awareness really does vary by location to location. So it's not, some chains are more consistent across the board than others. I think that we're going to see more restaurants getting trained, and potentially more regulations. But, when you think about it, I mean, our labeling law went into effect in 2006, and it took us until last year, 7 years, to get gluten-free out. So it'll be interesting on how all that plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting when I saw those dates up there and how early New Zealand came out with labeling the allergens. I was in New Zealand earlier this year, and I was just amazed that it was a lot easier to get gluten-free in New Zealand than it is in the U.S.
Right.
My name is Pam Heidenreich. I'd like to know about, I carry my own butter and stuff with me when I do go to restaurants. There's a couple here in Michigan that are gluten-free. They serve bread and everything. But you were talking about, I'm going to be traveling with my husband to Germany. And you were saying, how big are those containers I can bring with me if I wanted to bring my butter and stuff like that?
Oh, excellent point. I usually say that when I'm talking on the when I'm talking about international. A couple things to remember when you're going internationally. When you're flying from the U.S. to, let's say, over to Germany, you can have things that are like in Ziploc bags, and so any food that you carry for your meals on board, those are all fine. However, once you land, what you need to remember is that you have to have it so that it's pre-packaged. Otherwise, from an agricultural perspective, they're going to throw that out.
Okay.
Would a seal a meal be okay, or does she have to have like a seal a meal? When you say P, when it's,
you broke up.
sorry. When pre-packaged, would like a seal a meal be okay?
Yeah, sealed, yes. Yeah, like a sealed. Like if you think about anything that the seal has not been broken.
Okay. Yeah, but that still isn't. She was talking about if you have your own seal a meal. Can you bring that over?
You know what we're talking about? You can make your.
The seal a meal. You mean like the seal a meal?
Right.
I thought you said sealed meals. Yeah. Seal a meal like you have. Yeah, it's like the vacuum pack.
Yeah.
Right.
Are those allowed?
That's a good question. I've never tried it, but when I think about it, because the reason that it's not allowed to go into the country is from agricultural purposes. So, any type of food products that you're bringing that aren't sealed.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Truthfully, I would try it, and you would have your sealed meal, your seal meal, and anything that you're bringing that's already sealed in your check bag.
Yeah.
So, I don't, if you think about it, for seal meal, it's not that they're looking at it. They're looking at it from, is there any impact on our agriculture and on our environment? That's an excellent question. I've never ever thought about that.
Smart girl.
Yeah. I would try. The thing is that I would also have a backup too.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
and then.
So I wouldn't just rely on that. But that's one good thing going back to like the market and how many more people and how many more businesses are getting involved in gluten free. Is now there's a lot more products that are out there that are individual, like even for like your salad dressings or just protein bars and protein mixes and all that stuff. And so I have my big containers, but then when I travel, then I always have all my other packaged stuff. So.
Yeah. And then I have one last question, if you don't mind. We're keeping you late. How about there have been questions when people go to a conference? And do you have any special tips? Because a lot of times the conferences have all these foods, but they don't have gluten-free options. I always bring my little own food bag, but do you have any tips?
Yeah, actually, you know what? That's an excellent point. And I do a couple things. One, from a conference perspective, depending upon how big the conference is, and like if you're going to a conference and it's more, from your company or that you're going to a client, like it's small, but you know what the venue is going to be.
Right.
Then what I do is I call and I talk to the food and beverage manager responsible for that conference.
Oh,
now, if you're going to a conference, like that's for 20, 100 people. If you're going to one of some of these huge conferences and that they just have like box lunches for everybody and it's like hundreds and hundreds, then what I do is I basically honestly, I look at that as that I'm traveling. And so I have my, as an example, I was just at this conference last week. And so there were probably about 40 people. And of course, they had this huge, gorgeous spread, blah, 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 blah. Well, you know what? They were going to just make a special meal for me because it was a buffet, you know. And so I brought I had my protein bar. I had some fruit. I had some cookies with me. You know, I mean, it was just because I didn't feel like bringing my soft-sided cooler to have ice in there so that I would keep my lunch meat cold. So I didn't want to really have anything that required anything to be chilled. So yeah, I mean, I do that if it's for conferences. I've even done that like with weddings. And you know, my niece, I mean, she had helped me with the book, and well, at the time she wasn't gluten-free, ironically. Now she is, but you know, at her wedding, and she must have gone back to them like 6 different times about making sure that I was going to have the meal. And I still brought something just in case. And unfortunately, at that wedding, yeah, they totally goofed up my meal, and I was just like, you know what? That's fine. I got it under control. So then I brought, you know, I had my roll. So I just didn't feel like I was
left out.
Yeah. So you weren't safe from hunger. Yeah.
And then I'm sitting there. I'm like, okay, well, at least this is better than nothing. So, but I totally treat conferences the same way that I treat going on the road or getting on a plane, which might sound funny, but yeah. So I'm totally prepared. And again, if they had something, and if they, when I talked to the food and beverage manager, and then they're like, okay, now go and ask for, go and ask for John when you come in. And then I go in and I go and ask for John, and he's like, oh, you're the gluten-free girl. Okay. And so no, this, right? And I'm like, yeah. And then they bring me out like this huge salad. I've had that, and even at conferences that had a few hundred people. Yeah. So it kind of depends. It depends on the venue. But as I said, even in that situation, I still had my whole meal. I just didn't use it. And so then I ate the salad, which had just like incredible vegetables and everything, and so it was totally gluten-free. So
great.
But treat it like you're traveling is what I would do.
Well, this has been so informative and so wonderful. I appreciate you sharing all your expertise with us.
Oh, well, as I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and I wish I was there in person, and hopefully that it will help all of you when you're eating out and traveling and get safe. So.
Well, thank you so much. You have a wonderful day, and it's okay that we post it on our Facebook page.
Oh, sure, yeah, feel free.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, no problem. You have a great day, too.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Okay, bye-bye.